we've got a hot one. And
Wow.
just so happened it came out of the Ponca Elk Center's
How
yard.
about that? Seriously.
In a normal situation, CWD can move about a mile per year. Once it hits that point where it becomes exponential and it starts spreading like wildfires. In 2016, I got the dreaded phone call in late February that one of our elk that we had pulled a sample off of from the 2015 hunt had come back positive, which there was a little bit of a delay there because the elk that came back positive wasn't a target or one that was sick or showing neurological symptoms. So what we typically did is we just, throughout the seasons on elk and deer, because we'd send them in together, we would just gather all those samples in a big box. And then once the seasons was over, we'd do one shipment.
Yeah.
And so that sample happened to be in there. And we sent those to the CWD lab in Wisconsin. And, they called back and said, hey, we've got a hot one. And
wow. And at that point, so 2016, was CWD rampant in other areas? Like, I'm kind of just curious, was that a shock to you? And did you even know what CWD was at the time?
I did know what CWD was. Of course, that's, as far as being a big game manager.
Sure.
That's always something that you're looking for. Of course, we were testing for it, and unfortunately, just hadn't found it up until then. We even started testing up like 2002, shortly after the elk hunt started.
I was gonna say, because if you guys are already taking samples, you must know of some prevalence elsewhere.
That was just routine surveillance.
Yeah,
and of course, we were also doing some of that target surveillance, which we had talked about a little earlier. If you see an elk that's just acting a little bit funny, we'll go out and sample that elk. Just to make sure. And we had done that for years and had never found one. Of course, the way CWD is, for a long period of time, it kind of flatlines and it grows very slowly. And it's very difficult to find it when it's in low prevalence. But then once it hits that point where it becomes exponential and it starts spreading like wildfire, essentially, then it becomes obvious pretty quickly.
Gotcha.
And that's kind of where we found ourselves. But your question about, was other states looking for it? They were. So in 2002, which is when we originally started looking for it, Wisconsin had went positive.
Okay.
Of course, Colorado, they had found it in the late 60s, and it was still kind of unknown what it was.
I didn't know it went back that far.
Yeah, so they knew something was going on, but, even up until the 1980s when we brought the elk here, CWD wasn't talked about. They knew very little about it. But anyways, in like 2002, Wisconsin went positive, and a lot of states learned from Wisconsin. So they tried to eradicate the disease. They went in and they started shooting every deer, within the hot zone. And, that agency took it over the head from their public because they were going in and killing, tremendous amounts of deer and trying to eradicate it.
That's quite the reaction.
Yeah, and so they found out real quickly that even after they went in and eradicated deer from the original hotspot, they had another hotspot show up, and then another hotspot.
It's just not going to work.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so they figured out, okay, so that
spread too quick. Once they found it,
it's already there.
Yeah,
by the time you're finding it, if you're finding a sick deer, it's already probably in others as well.
Yeah.
But we were able to learn from their mistakes, essentially. Hate to say it was a mistake because they didn't know. They were just trying to
testing. You got to try several different methods. I mean, that's part of the. And you would know so much more about this than me, but the scientific method is like you got to test all these different options, see which one, because that might have worked. If it had eradicated it, you'd be like, we'd be sitting here like praising them, right?
Yeah. So in the early to mid 2000s, CWD, after Wisconsin went positive, was a big deal. Everybody was testing for it. That's kind of when we started testing. Other states started testing. And it actually didn't show up in many places. Wisconsin was kind of the big one. Of course, we knew it was out west, Colorado, Wyoming, Kansas, Nebraska, kind of in the western part. And so we fast forward up until about 2010, it kind of died out. And there was a lot of federal funding that became available for testing, after that Wisconsin. And so up till about 2010, a lot of that funding was starting to run out. And so a lot of the states, were just kind of like, well, we've tested and we're not finding it. And so it kind of died down for a while. Then Missouri found it at a very low prevalence, and it was actually in a captive facility.
A what?
A captive facility where people have captive deer.
Like pet deer.
Yeah, like high fence.
Okay. Yeah.
And so they started testing around that facility, and they found on the outside. And so 2010, it kind of got ramped back up a little bit. But to be honest with you, Arkansas was when it really, started kicking off big time again, because, we came out of the gate with such a high prevalence, and everyone realized, like, okay, so if it happened to Arkansas, it can happen to us as well.
Yeah.
You could have a pretty big problem and not know about it.
Right.
And so in 2016 is when it really kind of resurged, and you started seeing lots of other states. Of course, Mississippi and Tennessee was shortly after us. Now you've had Louisiana.
You said Oklahoma.
Oklahoma was just recent, like within the last couple months.
Oh, wow.
So that one just came out, I believe, in May, like mid-May.
And is that so? You're saying in 2016 it was found in an elk, and that was the first case. It wasn't a whitetail first.
It was in an elk first.
Wow.
And it was kind of just the way it worked out. So we had pulled that routine surveillance sample off of the elk, from a harvested elk that fall, and it came back positive. Well, in that same batch, there was a target deer right out here in the yard of this facility.
Really?
There was a deer, and of course, there was the picture of the one drooling on the wall.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a picture of the one that was here that was very similar. There was a doe that showed up out here. She just wasn't acting right, was drooling. And the facility manager at that time, Mary Ann Hicks, she actually lives right across the road. She's retired now. But she had called and said, there's this deer out here in the yard that's acting kind of weird. And just the timing of it was like, okay. So we've had this elk come back positive. Now we have this sick deer. So we came and we sampled her, and she came back positive. So we had our first elk and our first deer almost back to back.
Back to back.
And just so happened it came out of at the time, the Ponca Elk Center's
How
yard.
about that? Seriously.
Yeah, so it
Literally brought it to Game and Fish.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here I am. Here's the proof.
I mean, that's how it kind of seemed.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just pretty eerie how it worked out.
Yeah,
but
that is kind of crazy.
so now we have CWD in 2 species, and at that point we had our CWD response plan that had already been drafted in the mid 2000s. I believe like 2006 they'd put that together, just anticipating that, hey, we're going to have this on the shelf.
Yeah.
And if it ever hits, then we're going to have a plan.
We'll be ready.
Right out of the gate instead of having to be caught on our heels. So
That's pretty cool that happened that way, that you guys would be prepared as an agency for something like that. I'm sure there's probably other plans in place now that we hopefully won't have to use in the future, but maybe are already being prepared.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely helped us a lot because we came, from day one, we already said, okay, we're going to follow this plan.
Yeah.
And so we had marching orders, okay, here's what we're going to do. And we started following that plan. And
so what was the plan?
Well, first of all, it was putting in the regulations. We at the time we had like the 3-point rule here. So what you're doing by having the 3-point rule is you're saving younger bucks, which, for big buck management, that's what you want to do, is you don't want to kill a bunch of young ones. But for CWD, we knew that the bucks had the higher prevalence. And so by saving those younger bucks, they're the ones that have a tendency to disperse farther distances. They're getting pushed outside of the other dominant bucks' home ranges. So we knew by saving those younger bucks that are going to potentially move farther distances was bad. So that'd be one of the regulations that we did. We took the 3-point rule off.
And that was as a result of CWD?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yep. So that was one of the first things we did, was to start trying to put, again, that hard line in the sand around and say, okay, we got to get our hands wrapped around where is CWD at this point, because we can't stop it if we don't know where it's at. So another thing was the baiting and feeding. We outlawed that for the majority of the year. Prior to CWD, you could have corn out for your deer, year round.
Year round.
And we knew that was a big potential to spread the disease, by having deer congregating in one area.
That saliva's in the corn. Now the next deer comes along, picks it up.
So that was another thing that was in our response plan, is to do that. So a lot of regulation stuff that was spawned by that. Also, we had a sampling plan. And so we knew just by other states like Wisconsin that you needed to look at least 5 or 10 miles. It'd be actually it's 5 miles from the spot. But then if you look at your diameter, you look at a 10-mile area around that hot spot. because in a normal situation, CWD can move about a mile per year. That's if man doesn't move, a carcass or anything. So just in a naturally occurring situation, it can move at about that rate at a low prevalence. So we came in and we did that circle, with the 10 mile. And
with this being ground zero.
Yes.
That's great.
And so what we actually had, we had the elk that was up around Pruitt. We had this deer here. So we had two hot spots that were pretty close. And you may have heard about it looked like a racetrack. It was actually an oval. Instead of having two circles, because they overlapped, we just did a giant, it looked like a NASCAR racetrack.
Yeah.
And so we had two hot spots. And if you look at CWD, and this is going back to research from other states, to have a 95% confidence that you'll find it if it's there at a 1% prevalence, you need to kill 300 deer.
Oh,
That's insane.
So we came in and we killed actually 266 is what we ended up harvesting. But what that will tell you is that if it's there and you kill 300 deer, you'll find it again
Mm-hmm.
if it's at least 1% prevalence.
okay.
And if it's higher,
Yeah, you're going to find it a
You
lot
find a
more.
lot more.
And that's the reason we didn't harvest 300, because we had went out for a couple weeks. We had, we had a bunch of game and fish biologists come out, and, we were going out and we were shooting deer. And we had sent that initial batch off to Wisconsin. And of course, we're still here shooting deer because it takes a few days for the samples to get there and get ran.
And to kill that many deer takes a few days.
Yeah, and it seems like, of course, don't quote me on these numbers because they start running together, but it seems like the initial batch, we had like 65 samples that we sent in, and 19 of them were positive.
Oh, wow.
So we knew initially, like,
You're like way above a 1% prevalence.
yeah, and so at the time, our administration said, all right, let's shut it down.
Yeah.
Killing another 40 deer and is not, we already know that the problem's a lot worse than what we had anticipated. So that's why we cut it off at 266 and didn't go all the way to the 300. So we kind of, for lack of better terms, we stepped back and punted. And so we knew that racetrack isn't even close to being the boundaries of our CWD. So that's when we started kind of ranging out. We started our freezer program that we have now, where each county has at least 2 freezers where the hunters can drop a head off, and we'll sample that free of charge. And so that helps us with surveillance of the disease to find it in areas where we might not know where it's at this point.